Welcome to everyone. Hello, hello, hello. I'm Jake Morphonios. It is Wednesday, December 13th, 2023. Welcome to you all. Hit the like button on your way in. Uh, Tonight, and let me know with a thumbs up out there in the chat if the volume is good. Otherwise, I'll make some adjustments here. Good to see you all in the chat. Katie Cat, Political Foolishness. Some of you guys out there, thank you for helping out with moderation. Tonight, I was going to be originally reviewing some material from this an old book I've had for years, Benjamin Netanyahu, A Place Among the Nations, Israel and the World, and it's his his propaganda that he wrote back in, I think it was 93, published in 1993. And specifically, I was going to be talking about the chapter where he finally has his big proposal for peace with the Palestinians, and I was going to be going through some of that material with you tonight. But I decided to change it up here last minute and talk about something else. What I will probably do instead with that topic is I'll probably write an article on that and post it to Substack. Now, if you are not subscribed to my newsletter, do it. You can go to Substack and sign up for my newsletter. When you first go there, you can put in your email address, blackstoneintel.substack.com. And if someone wants to type that into the chat so you can click it there, that'd be good. And I'll add it into the show notes later. But on Substack, when you go there, you can either sign up for the free newsletter or a paid subscription. The free ones, I put out some material that is free. I've just started this week with it, and I'm doing more of the longer articles for paying members. But even with a free one, you can go here, and I've got different articles. Most recent one that I published for the paid audience is about Israel's attempts over the years to reduce its black population. But you can also go and find my podcasts. I've got to put some more of them up here. Not all of them are listed. You can also find my social links. So anyway, that is Substack. I'd love to have some of you in there as subscribers, and some of you may already be. Now, what I'm going to be doing tonight is talking mostly about some of the more difficult aspects of this ongoing conflict. I'm sure most of you are very experienced at this point, arguing and debating all of these issues with people in social media. And you'll probably recognize that there's a lot of nuance. Some of it is very simple. You don't kill civilians. Some of it is propaganda that's hard to overcome because people get things stuck in their minds and they can't see past it. So we're going to be digging in a little bit into moral philosophy about what Israel is doing, and even a little bit of what Hamas has done. And we're going to talk about it. And if you enjoy the presentation, since I cannot get super chats, please go to buymeacoffee.com/blackstoneintel. You can make a donation there. You can also donate through paypal.me/blackstoneintel. And you can sign up to become a monthly patron at blackstoneintel.com. At the end of my show, what I'm going to do is log into those three accounts and recognize anybody who has made a donation today. But I want to jump right in. Supporters of, and I'll tell you what got me started on this, is I do a lot of I try not to debate so much as discuss with people on Twitter and elsewhere a lot of these issues that are hard, that require a lot more than what you can put in just a little tweet. And every once in a while, it's rare, but every once in a while, I'll come across someone who is completely on the other side of this issue than I am, but they are not into ad hominems and they're willing to debate the substance of their position, and they understand their position well enough and they're comfortable enough that they can talk about their side and their perspective. Those are the people that I have the opportunity to persuade and move, to convert them to, even if they don't give up their support for Israel, at the very least, they will acknowledge the legitimacy of the other side of the argument. And there was one person in particular I was talking to this week, and I'm going to share with you a little bit of what I shared with him. And it's on the subject of terrorism, because those of us who are pro-Palestinian, we can see that what Israel is doing is terrorism. But the other side says the same thing. They say what Hamas does is terrorism. So who are the terrorists? Let's talk about this, because I feel like supporters of Israel turn a blind eye to the terrorism of the Jewish state. And they insist that the entire conversation that we have about this issue has to be focused on one date, October 7th, 2023. Someone's saying sound is low. Let me see if I can raise it up some. Now, if I start clipping out there, let me know. I'm raising it up a little bit to see if that's any better. They want to say everything that happened on October 7th is terrorism. That's it, period, the end. Truth is, Zionists don't have a darn clue what terrorism is if they are going to continue to refuse to exhibit even a modicum of the kind of moral courage that it takes to honestly take a look at what Israel is doing now and their overall history of this never-ending brutality against the Palestinian people. These people that are of this mindset, they don't understand. Palestinians live every single day of their lives under the boots of callous, uncaring military and security systems that impose relentless suffering and fear on the Palestinian people. The Palestinians are treated like animals. You've got the Israeli settlers, not just the military, not just the security apparatus, but the settlers themselves. They're radicals. They commit acts of terror daily against the Palestinians. I've seen the maltreatment and the abuse of the Palestinian people with my own eyes inside Israel, also inside the Palestinian territories. So there is not a damn thing that any Israeli apologist can say that is ever going to take away from me my own direct knowledge of the misery that Palestinians are experiencing. That is a direct result of Israeli apartheid and Jewish supremacist policies of the Israeli government. But they say, okay, hey, let's talk about October 7th. And I'm willing to do that when I find somebody who is, I think, is somewhat reasonable and can have a mature dialogue. Fine, I'm happy to do it. And I'm even willing to talk about it in a fair-minded way that challenges my own personal preferences, my own biases. And so I want to start with that. I want to start with saying things that kind of come up against my own bias as a very pro-Palestinian person. And for a minute or two, you're going to think, you may not like what I have to say. I do believe, and I've told you this before, that the Hamas attacks against the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, I believe that those attacks were morally justified. I think that it is legitimate resistance against an illegal occupation. Under international law, if you are a military that is carrying out an illegal occupation, or even if you're not a military, you can be another kind of party, like a terrorist group like ISIS, right? Remember, ISIS went into Syria and into Iraq, and they occupied entire cities, entire provinces. They kept the locals hostage. They literally put them in cages and put them out in the streets as human shields. So whether you are a military or a terrorist group, any kind of group, if you are engaged in illegal activity, an illegal occupation, your victims, they have the right to defend themselves. They have the right to fight against you, even with lethal force. You, as the occupier, as the criminal party, you do not have an inherent right of self-defense because you are carrying out illegal actions against a victim. A victim has the right to fight back. So that means that the Israeli Defense Forces, the Israeli security forces, and I would argue even the Israeli politicians that are responsible for maintaining this occupation, they're all fair game. They are legitimate targets. So I don't fault Hamas for attacking the IDF on October 7th. But as I have said from day one, any attacks by Hamas against non-combatant, innocent civilians are acts of terrorism. And this is the part where you're going to maybe get a little pissed off at me. But I've been saying the same thing for over 20 years. I first started writing articles about this back in, I think it was the year 2000. It was between 2000 and 2001. There were various Palestinian groups that were carrying out suicide bombing attacks against civilian targets inside Jerusalem and around Israel, Tel Aviv. And I condemned it back then. I see a lot of people on our side of the debate who are spending a lot of time in social media trying to explain, trying to argue that all of the actions by Hamas on October 7th were legitimate forms of resistance. Now, I disagree with that. And the reason that I disagree with that is because I have watched hours of footage of the Hamas attacks. It's true. A lot of the attacks were against legitimate targets, the IDF. But I also saw plenty of indiscriminate murders of random Israeli civilians from that day. So I see people arguing because of Israel's military conscription laws, where everybody has to serve in the military, practically everybody. The argument is about 2/3 of the population of Israel is either current IDF, former IDF, or they're in the reserves. Either way, they're part of the military. And I get that. But shooting a civilian mother in front of her children because she might have been in the IDF in her younger years, that does not make her a fair target. It's my belief that the day we cross the line into believing that murdering unarmed women or children or the elderly, if we believe that that's morally acceptable, we have lost the high ground. And I want to point this out to you by sharing a couple thoughts from a couple lines from an article I just read before I started live streaming tonight. If attacks on civilians who are not actively participating in some way or another in helping the terrorists, if attacking civilians is legitimate, consider from your own society, whether you're in the USA, Canada, the UK, wherever you are, the bombastic title here of this article from the Express is Hamas threatens violence against Americans everywhere in chilling new video. And it says Hamas has threatened violence against Americans everywhere in their latest statement. And it quotes a guy, I think he lives in Tunisia. Tunis is the largest city in Tunisia. Sami Abu Zuri. He's been around for years. This guy is one of the, I think he is the spokesman for either Hamas as a whole for the outside of the Palestinian territories, or he's just a spokesman for the Al-Qassam brigades, which is the militant wing of Hamas. But anyway, outside. But this is what he said. He said, when Blinken, Secretary Blinken, is justifying the killing of women and children, the sons of our nation should say to him, you are the enemy, just like Netanyahu, and you must pay the price, just like Netanyahu. Okay, I'm willing to listen to that. You know, you've got U.S. politicians who are enabling the Israeli military to carry out these atrocities against Palestinian civilians. Does that make them a fair target? Probably does. But he goes on. We should keep this in mind. So if our nation thinks that the heroic acts of the Al-Qassam brigades release it from the responsibility, that is a misconception and a mistaken assessment that should be discarded. Now it is our nation's turn to pressure the Americans to stop this war. We need violent acts against American and British interests everywhere, as well as the interests of all the countries that support the occupation. They must pay a price for the blood of our women and children who are being killed in cold blood on the streets of Gaza. They must pay a price so that they know that Gaza is not alone, and that when they gave the order to kill, they should have been prepared to pay the necessary price. Now, I'm going to say a couple of thoughts on that. I agree with part of what he says, but not all of it. I have said from the start, and I've been saying the same thing for years upon years, that what the United States government does to enable Israel's crimes against the Palestinians, that puts a target on the backs of the American people. Because do you think that any of these groups like Hamas, Al-Qaeda, any jihadist group, do you think that they have any chance of defeating the U.S. military? No. So what are they going to do? They're going to target civilians. Supporting Israeli terrorism puts a target on the backs of our people. Now, you say, all right, well, all Israelis are fair game. Civilians, they're part of the occupation. They're fair game. All right, well, that would also mean that the American people who are not necessarily engaged in the occupation itself, we're not over there, but our tax dollars are paying for the Israeli bombs. Our tax dollars, $3 to $5 billion every single year, just in support of the Israeli military. Since we're the taxpayers and we have not stopped our government from giving this money, does that make us legitimate targets as well? You may say, well, maybe. Let me ask you this. Let's say you are a parent. Let's say somebody in the name of Hamas or actual Hamas operative goes into an elementary school in your town where your children attend and shoots all the children, or as many as possible, shoots teachers, shoots all the people. Were your children legitimate targets? They're Americans. You say, all right, well, they're not taxpayers. All right. Say they go into your place of work and shoot you. You are a taxpayer. Are you a legitimate target? If you are going to say that average Israeli non-combatant civilians are legitimate targets, You have to accept that average American citizens, including our children, are legitimate targets. Now, the day that a Hamas operative were to come into a public school in America and shoot up the kids, I guarantee you, your idealism is going to change. You are not going to say, whoa, that was good job, Hamas. You're fighting for freedom. You're fighting for the freedom of the Palestinian people. You're going to have a righteous indignation, and you're not going to be so supportive. Now, having said that, let me go on, because that's just, we're just talking about the idea of this, the philosophy of this. My point is, I don't think that our pro-Palestine side should be even trying to argue in defense of killing of Israeli civilians. But let's talk about the civilians. Israel says that they revised their death count down from over 1,500 to 1,400. Latest number I saw is 1,219 people that they say were killed by Hamas on October 7th. Now, Israeli sources, I've seen this printed in Haaretz, but it's confirmed by the Israeli military. Israeli sources confirm that at least 427 of those 1,219 people were Israeli combatants, meaning they were active duty military. As I've said, I think that military occupiers, fair game. So let's deal with the rest. You've got 792 civilians out of that 1,200. You and I both know that multiple Israeli sources, including not just from police investigation, but also individual reports from eyewitnesses, Israeli eyewitnesses, say that several of the civilians, we don't know a number, we'll probably never know a number, but several of the civilians at the Nova Festival were killed by Israeli forces. And also in the kibbutz, a kibbutz is kind of like a village, a commune. Years ago, back in the 70s, they were just outright socialist camps. They were like versions of communist with a small c groups. And these little communes end up being developed into settlements later on. And that's what a kibbutz is. So in these kibbutzes that are around Gaza, when Israeli forces responded, several Israelis were killed by friendly fire. Eyewitnesses, actual Israelis who were there, say this is the case, that they saw it with their own eyes. So I believe it. So I'm going to say, for the sake of conversation, a very modest, very minimal estimate of the 792 civilians that were killed by Israel through friendly fire. I'm going to say 10%, which is 79 civilians. So that brings us down to 713 civilians killed by Hamas. Now, I'm not bringing the numbers down to suggest that 700 civilians is not a terrible thing. But what I am doing is trying to show you the numbers, because you'll always hear in social media that Hamas killed 1,200 people. Yeah, well, let's take out the military targets and even set aside a couple of them there and deal with the real numbers. We're looking at 713 civilians. We'll just say 700, round it down a couple. In response to 700 Israeli civilians being killed, and many of those weren't even Israeli citizens. They were foreign nationals, like the Thai workers that were there doing, working in the fields and so forth. In response to those being killed, Israel has dropped thousands of tons of missiles on densely packed civilian infrastructure, residential buildings, humanitarian centers, even humanitarian centers run by the United Nations. They've dropped bombs on schools, Everybody knows they've dropped bombs on hospitals. The IDF has repeatedly targeted civilians who followed the command to flee from the north. They targeted convoys as they were fleeing south. And now that the civilians are mostly down in the south, Israel is killing them down there too. At bare minimum, 18,000 civilians have been killed by Israel since October 7th. And we know that around half of those are children. IDF spokesperson Jonathan Conricus, I don't know how you say his name. Excuse me. IDF spokesperson has confirmed that the Gaza Health Ministry's death toll, the statistics they put out, that it's likely accurate. And according to Haaretz, which is a major Israeli newspaper, the civilian proportion of the Palestinian deaths is higher than any other conflict in the 20th century. And that includes even higher than World War II. You include all of the mass genocidal campaigns carried out, targeting civilians. Take everything into account, the horrors of the Holocaust and the mass murder, the attempted genocide of Jews during the Holocaust. Even World War II, and I didn't believe this figure, so I looked it up to confirm. But it's true. What Haaretz is saying is true. The civilian proportion of deaths from Israeli attacks is a higher proportion of civilian to combatants than any conflict in the 20th century. Is it moral? Is this warfare moral? It probably sounds like an oxymoron to have morality and warfare in the same sentence. But the truth is, most of the world recognizes that there is a moral component, even in times of war, that has to be observed for warfare to be justifiable or moral. Now, generally speaking, let's just kind of break this down first. Generally speaking, for an individual, a regular person like me, or like one of you out there, like William H. or Vince Russo or anyone like that, we cannot kill an innocent bystander, even if it means saving our own lives. Not morally, not legally. So, for example, if, hypothetically, let's say there's a man standing over here and he's got a gun. He says he's going to shoot me. He's aiming his gun at me. He's screaming. He's saying he's going to kill me. It is still immoral for me to reach down and grab a little kid who's standing next to me and hold them up and hold that child in front of me to take the bullet for me, right? Does it save my life? Yes. Am I the one doing the bad thing, shooting the bullet? No. But I am not morally justified in sacrificing another person, another innocent person's life to save my own life. Okay, you with me so far? Let's take it a step further. Let's say gunman's still over there, but he's in a crowd of people mixed in. I've got a machine gun. I might be able to shoot this guy before he shoots me. I might be able to defend myself. But in order to hit him, I have to spray with automatic fire everybody around him in the hope that one of those shots, one of those bullets, will hit him. It'll save my life, right? Now, am I justified in killing the innocent people, the innocent bystanders, to save my life? No, of course not. But somehow, under a skewed interpretation of moral philosophy that we apply to warfare, we say, in times of war, collateral damage, unintended collateral damage, is morally justified. as a consequence of warfare. Now, I want to talk about that for a minute because I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about it a lot the last month. It's generally accepted that if every effort is made by a military to dramatically minimize deaths of the innocent bystanders, this international law of armed conflict allows for soldiers to carry out operations that are sometimes going to result in some civilian deaths, as long as the soldiers are observing, for example, the principle of proportionate response. Now, can I do it as an individual? No. Can a military do it? I know this sounds insane, but that the moral standards are somehow different when you widen the scale, because they argue that it's impossible in all cases to avoid civilian casualties. But let me emphasize here that what Israel is doing, because Israel is making the argument that, hey, collateral damage, we can't help this. We can't help it. The Hamas members are all mixed in with the civilian population. So we're morally justified. Let me emphasize that carrying out attacks directly on civilian targets, which is what Israel is doing, while they may hope that there are some legitimate Hamas targets intermingled, that is not morality. It is not allowed under the rules of war. It is not a legitimate form of self-defense. So despite these rules of collateral damage being a little bit different from me as an individual or a military acting in self-defense, the principle is the exact same in both cases. When it comes to attacks that because if a military knows or can reasonably foresee that their actions that they're going to take are going to kill innocent bystanders, they cannot carry that out. Collateral damage is only allowed, it's only morally acceptable in warfare when it's an accident, when it's unintended. So in other words, while we make some allowance in wartime for unavoidable civilian casualties, there is no allowance in the philosophy of moral warfare for direct targeting, purposeful targeting of civilians. That is exactly what Israel is doing. It is carrying out large-scale operations targeting civilian populations in Gaza. Now, even further, we have to call into question the very basics here. Is Israel actually acting in self-defense? Or is what Israel is doing actually a war of vengeance, a war of retribution, an offensive war that is utilizing the tactic of ethnic cleansing to acquire additional territory? Or are they just committing straight up genocide? There are three foundational premises that we have to take a look at when we talk about the morality of war. First of all, number one, here in the United States, we have the Declaration of Independence, and most of you know this. All of us are created with inalienable rights. That includes life, it includes liberty, which is the right to be free, and it includes the pursuit of happiness, which is the right of self-determination. Okay, so that's the first principle here, the first premise we have to look at. All people are born with the right to be free and to and to live. Second premise, only wars of self-defense are justified. You never have an offensive war that is moral because it always includes the violation of innocent people's right to life. Can't wage a war without killing people. An offensive war is going to kill innocent people and deprive them of their right to life. So only wars of self-defense are justified. Third premise, the only time that the right to life can be justifiably violated is if that person has somehow forfeited their right to life by either killing an innocent person or by posing a legitimate threat to another person. That's the only time you can kill. You can't take a life just because someone stole from you. What this premise leads to is a differentiation between categories of civilians: innocent civilians, non-innocent civilians. Israel says that no civilians in Gaza are innocent. Now, innocent civilians, they don't pose a serious threat to the lives of other people. Therefore, it is immoral to kill an innocent civilian. Now, if you are a non-innocent civilian who has killed other people, or you are helping to kill other people, you are categorized as non-innocent. And if you're a non-innocent civilian, you might not be a combatant. A combatant is someone taking up arms. Okay, you can be a civilian who is not involved in combat and still be a non-innocent civilian. Such people are justifiable targets in times of war. For example, let's go back to that dumb example I used earlier. There's the gunman, right? He's threatening to kill me. He's got his gun aimed at me. I've got my automatic weapon. Under the first scenario, I can't shoot and kill those bystanders because they're innocent. But what if those bystanders are helping him? What if, even though they aren't the ones holding the gun, what if they see him drop the gun because he doesn't want to shoot me, but they pick up the gun and give it back to him and say, we're going to kill you unless you pull the trigger? Are they innocent now? No. Are they combatants? No, they're not engaged in combat, but they are pretty darn close. In that case, can I open up and spray them with bullets? Am I justified even though they don't have their fingers on the trigger? Yes, I can. So under circumstances like that, I might be justified, but that same principle applies in wartime. If the militant wing of Hamas, Al-Qassam brigades, if they are hiding, for example, this actually happened, or at least this is what Israel accused, this is what their accusation. They said that a commander, a Hamas commander, was inside one of the refugee camps in a huge residential building. They said he was hiding inside the civilian population. And so they blew up the whole damn building, blew up the whole complex, killed hundreds of people, hundreds of innocent people. Is Israel morally justified? They killed a bad guy. No, they are not morally justified. They can't drop a bunker buster on an entire apartment building because they say they believe that a Hamas militant is somewhere inside. Now, this is another reason, going back to what I was saying earlier, my criticism of Hamas. This is why I abhor the targeting of innocent Israeli civilians, both back in 2000 during the Second Intifada and to this day. If Hamas engages in atrocities and then they withdraw back into Gaza and they are taking refuge there, even if the civilian population is not actively trying to help them, what happens is Israel will then falsely claim that the civilian population are legitimate targets, that they are non-innocent civilian targets. And that's exactly what Israel is saying. Israel is the world's master of deceitful propaganda. And clearly it's working to some extent, because what do they say? There are no innocent civilians in Gaza. Is it working? Is it convincing people? Unfortunately so. You see this nonstop in social media, especially in the Western nations, in Western Europe, in the United States. Now, you and I know better, but you talk to the average mouth breather out there, on Twitter, and you're going to hear the same thing over and over. Israel has a right to defend itself. And besides, the Palestinians in Gaza, they're the ones who voted Hamas into power, so how are they innocent? So we need to control the conversation. We need to push back against this obnoxious propaganda and reiterate all throughout social media that Israel's actions are not self-defense. Israel's actions are terrorism. And we can go back and base this on the three premises that I mentioned earlier. First, Palestinians have a natural right to life, to freedom, to self-determination. Right? You can get your opponent to agree to that. Second, the war Israel is waging overwhelmingly targets civilians. 60% casualty rate is what even Israel has acknowledged. I think it's much higher than that. I don't think that 40% of 18,000 people are Hamas fighters. But even using Israel's figures of 60%, that is a disproportionate response. If it was less than 50%, I don't know, maybe you could argue they're not targeting civilians, they just really suck at hitting the right people. But when you have a majority of the people being killed, which Israel acknowledges are civilians, this is not a war against Hamas. This disproportionate number of civilians means that this is not an act of defense, it's an act of offense, and it's not morally justified. It's not proportional. And it's clear that the Palestinians, the 18,000, these are not, we don't call them collateral damage. Collateral damage are the people accidentally killed that are off to the side. If anything, it's Hamas fighters who are the accidental collateral damage in Israel's war against Gaza, against the Gazan civilians. That's who the war is against. 60% to 80% of the people killed easily are civilians. That's who the war is against. Third premise, the masses of civilians that are being killed by Israel, they did not participate in the actions of October 7th. They had no role in killing the innocent, non-combatant Israeli civilians. So the fact that the majority of the people being killed are Palestinian civilians and not Hamas fighters, who had these people that they're killing had nothing to do with October 7th. So is Israel defending itself? No. They are engaging in terrorism. Now, Israel says, okay, fine, we're killing civilians, but this serves the greater good. Unfortunately, because Hamas is all intermingled in there, you can't wipe out Hamas without a high civilian death toll. So you just have to deal with it. Where else do we hear that argument? I hear it from the Biden administration. I hear it from the UK. I hear it from Canada, from France, from Germany, from the governments. Not the people. The general populations knows that, what's really happening. It's the governments. Biden administration, you've got Secretary of State Blinken out there always saying the same thing. We keep reiterating to Israel to reduce their civilian, death toll against the Palestinians. Tisk, tisk, bad, bad. Don't do that. We're sad. Well, do you call for a ceasefire? No, because we have to root out the terrorists. Israel has to get in there and destroy Hamas once and for all. And yes, there are a lot of civilian deaths, but that's a price that has to be paid for the greater good. Oh, in my reading this month, that brought up this argument that Blinken and Biden and all these Western leaders make, and that so many people parrot in social media, that, sorry, civilian casualties, can't help it. This reasoning stems back to a theory of moral philosophy that was discussed a lot by Thomas Aquinas years ago, centuries ago. The argument is that collateral damage is morally justified because of the greater good that's brought about. But when you read the explanations that Aquinas gives, there are 4 components to this theory. And so I'm going to apply those 4 components to what Israel's doing, to Israel's kind of warfare. First of all, Israel's military, and these are the 4 principles. Israel's military has to be engaged in actions that are directly trying to achieve a specific moral good. Now, in this case, the moral good would be the protection of their own civilian population. Okay, that would be, if that's what they were doing, that would be a legitimate moral good. Second, Israel is not seeking any other agenda with its war than to achieve that specific moral good, which is protecting its citizens. Okay? Third thing, the collateral damage from Israel's fighting itself is not a means to achieve this moral good or the protection of the Israeli citizens. In other words, the collateral damage, the high civilian death toll in Gaza is not an actual tool. It's not a means of protecting Israel. Last here, the principle is that the positive outcomes for this war have to outweigh the negative ones. So let's take these 4 things. And I wish Aquinas was here so I could smack him around and debate this with him. Is Israel killing Palestinian civilians in order to protect Israeli civilians? No, we've already talked about that. Palestinian civilians didn't carry out the attacks of October 7th. Is Israel only seeking to protect its citizens from Hamas? No. That's not what it's doing with its war. Israel is engaging in ethnic cleansing of Gaza. They've already cleared most of the north. They've pushed them down into the south. Now they're killing them down in the south, trying to push them across the border into Egypt. They're trying to kill as many as they can along the way. But the goal is to get rid of them. And beyond that, Israel is also carrying out military operations in the West Bank. Hamas is not in control in the West Bank. Israel, the Israeli government, has given the green light to these terrorist attacks by radical Jewish settlers in the West Bank. And again, none of this is about protecting its own citizens. This is a pre-scripted plan of territorial expansion, the Greater Israel Project, that Israel has made no secret about. This is not like we don't know about this. They talk about it constantly. Zionists have been talking about Greater Israel from the very beginning. They want territorial expansion. One of the things I was going to talk about, if we had discussed this, is Netanyahu talks extensively about not 1 inch of land is going to be part of a Palestinian state, ever. This is back at the time of the Oslo Accords, which he helped to undermine. So what is Israel doing? It's carrying out a territorial expansion that has nothing to do with protecting its civilians from the people that perpetrated October 7th. Third, Israel is using this collateral damage to achieve multiple goals: the territorial expansion, the acquisition of land, the elimination, the ethnic cleansing of Arab Palestinians from the region so that you don't have opposition to a Jewish-only state. Is this serving the greater good? No. I mean, these acts of terrorism against the Palestinian civilian population are guaranteed to create countless new fighters. You all know out there, if we Americans were the victims of these Israeli attacks, if Israel was killing our children, what are we going to do? Are we just going to go back to our lives and say, well, I guess life is better off? Quite a few of us would plot and scheme how we can do our very best to overthrow Israel. That's normal. That's a normal human response to gross atrocity and ongoing subjugation. Resistance is natural. It is the natural human state to want to be free and to fight back against unjust oppression. All right, last item was in those 4 points was, oh yeah, does the good outweigh the bad? The good outcomes outweigh the bad outcomes. Even Western newspapers and even some in Israel now are admitting that Israel's actions are so barbaric, so cruel, so unjust that they are setting up far more negative outcomes than any positive outcomes that are being achieved. And you hear this, you don't see it represented in the media, but I go to a lot of social media forums that Israelis use, and there are quite a few people who, while they're still angry, they see that this is an overreach, what Netanyahu's regime is doing. So Israel has no moral justification for what it's doing because terrorism is not moral. That's why we need to increase our efforts out there in social media to emphasize what Israel is doing is not self-defense. It is bona fide state-executed terrorism. And the world is on our side in this. Maybe not our governments, but the entire world is condemning Israel's acts of terror. Even some of these Zionist politicians who run the U.S. government are starting to say, Israel, you're really going too far with this. We can see this, the cleansing of North Gaza. At the very least, we can say with certainty that Israel is guilty of ethnic cleansing. A strong case can be made given the high death toll and the ongoing targeting of civilians that this is attempted genocide. But I know how touchy Zionists get when they hear the word genocide, so let's just call it what it is: wide-scale mass murder. There, is that any softer? So when you talk to a Zionist, sure, yes, 700 Israeli civilians were killed on October 7th, and I don't have a problem saying that much of that, if not all of that 700, was acts of terrorism, because killing unarmed people can't do it. But in return, if Zionists don't turn around and agree that the mass murder of 18,000 Palestinian civilians is also terrorism, those people are bloody hypocrites, and there's no hope for them. Move on to the next person, because someone so morally bankrupt as to not acknowledge that killing masses of children is terrorism. Those people are spawns of Satan. Don't waste your time. Move on. Find somebody else to talk to. Keep trumpeting the truth, you'll come across people who are open-minded. The onus is not on our side to explain why this mass murder of Palestinian civilians is terrorism. We don't have to do that because the evidence speaks for itself. And I want you to use this tool. I want you to spread this out there. Any intellectually honest person who you think can handle it and give them fair warning, tell them to try. I've posted hours worth of video clips on my Telegram channel. t.me/blackstoneintel. I always warn you, it is graphic. It is not good stuff. But if you have any doubt that Israel is engaged in terrorism, or if you have someone who says, I've seen the videos of what Hamas did, it's terrible, those people are terrorists, give them this link and challenge them to spend 5 minutes watching the material that I've posted there. They will come away with absolute conviction that Israel is unmistakably guilty of blatant acts of heinous terrorism, the likes of which the world has not seen since the Holocaust. That's my message. I don't seek to excuse one bad action and then turn around and say the same action by the other party is bad. Targeting the IDF, those carrying out the illegal occupation. I wish that Israel would do the right thing and end the occupation without a single drop of blood being spilled. I don't want anyone to be killed over this. But I've seen how brutal the occupation is. I've gone through the gates. I've stood in the lines. I've seen children missing limbs who lost limbs in previous attacks by Israel. I've seen it. These people are traumatized. You cannot convince me that Israel's occupation is morally justifiable. It is not. And as long as they continue to perpetrate this horrendous apartheid system throughout the Palestinian territories and inside Israel proper itself, as long as they continue to have to deny the Palestinians the right of self-determination, either to have their own separate state or to have one non-Jewish state, a state where the rights of all citizens are equally respected, not based on what religion or what ethnicity you are, but the fact that you're a citizen of that state. So whether it's two state or one state, I don't care, until the Palestinian people have the same rights as the people of Israel, this conflict will continue. There is no way they're going to get rid of all the Palestinians. There are more Palestinians in the region than there are Israelis. Can't get rid of them all. You can try. But what Israel is doing is shooting itself in the foot. Israel has lost a great deal of support throughout the world that it had been building over time, even among the Arab world. So anyway, I do a lot of posting on Twitter, X, Twitter, whatever. My main account is Morphonios. Let me type it over here. I've got two of them. I've got Blackstone Intel, and I've got at Morphonios. Morphonios is my original one, but it's so heavily suppressed, I barely get any views. In fact, give me a second here. Let me show you. So I post a lot of stuff on Twitter. There's some AI artwork that I made. Or I guess the AI made it, but I told it what to make. But I post this stuff. I post a lot of information. Some of it is polemical. Some of it is personal, like this, the letter that I got back from my congressional representative, Kathy Manning. I ripped her a new hole for her response. Kathy Manning, she, so here in North Carolina, I wrote at the beginning of the conflict after October 7th. I wrote to her. It took a while before I got my standard letter back, but she goes on to explain, and she's a Democrat. She goes on to explain that Hamas launched unprovoked attack against innocent civilians, savagely killing, blah, 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 all this stuff. I support Biden's commitment to stand with Israel, blah, blah, blah. That's why I support the president's much needed, all this stuff. Basically, it was, no, I totally support everything that the USA and Israel is doing. So I looked up some of her, let me switch to a different screen here. I looked up some of her, some of her posts. And just she's always in there. I was shocked. Why is it that she's not Jewish? I don't think. Why is it that she is so determined to support Israel? And then, like, there's no context in which calls for the genocide of the Jews is acceptable rhetoric, all this stuff. But then I looked it up. This is small here. I'm not going to expand it, but I looked it up, and it turns out that Kathy Manning, even though she's a fairly new congresswoman from North Carolina and has almost no Jewish constituents, her top contributor, over $200,000, was AIPAC. Over $200-something thousand was AIPAC, her top contributor. Her second highest contributor was some capital management, $12,000. So that means that the Israel lobby, which is a foreign lobby, gave Kathy Manning 20 times more money than the second highest campaign contributor. And that, my dear friends, is exactly why Kathy Manning is out there shilling for Israel, because a foreign country, a lobby representing a foreign country, bought her off. You might enjoy reading my response to her there on Twitter. It was emphatic. But that's the case with so many of our politicians. You can go to opensecrets.org and look up your local representative. See how much influence Israel has on that person. I think that AIPAC ought to be banned, especially since back in the 90s it was found guilty of espionage. They had multiple people. I don't know if they went to prison or if they managed to flee to Israel before the case, but it was determined that AIPAC was engaging in espionage for Israel against the U.S. government. AIPAC owns AIPAC, and it's not even that AIPAC is the power. It's the very wealthy people behind AIPAC. Somebody's given AIPAC the money. AIPAC just doesn't come up with the money on their own. They've got big investors, very wealthy people. Why would someone do it? Just for ideology? Why would these billionaires put so much money into AIPAC? Because they just love the idea of Israel? No, they want to get the people that are billionaires have got a reason they became billionaires. Most of them. It's that they are involved in activities that make them big money. They make money through U.S. support for Israel. They make money. Right now, Biden pushing for $105 billion more for Israel, split between Israel and Ukraine, on top of the $3 to $5 billion we've already given them. This is with the United States running a budget deficit, $1.7 trillion budget deficit for the year 2022. That same year, Israel ran a budget surplus of $3 billion, the amount of money that the USA gave them. And even though they are running a budget surplus in Israel, here is the US government trying to give Israel tens of billions of dollars more. Why? Is it that we're trying to defend Israel? No. What happens is we transfer not just cash, we take weapons. We have deals with our weapons industry. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, all of these guys, where they produce the missiles, they produce the F-16s, whatever. Our stock is it's like somebody who has to have the latest iPhone every single time a new one comes out. Can't wait to get the new one. That's how it is with the weapons industry. As soon as the new toys come out, our military has to have it. It's not even our military so much as those who invest in the military industrial complex. So what we do is we take the stuff that's a year or two old, we sell that to a foreign government like Israel, and then we purchase new weapons from the war industry. So the war industry is making money constantly, and we are giving our overstock or our surplus to foreign governments. The investors in these war corporations are making a killing, a literal killing. That is why war never ends. That is why the United States government is always fighting wars. We're still engaged in multiple wars around the world. The media doesn't report much on it. This is why Biden and everybody wants to give so much money, so many weapons and so much money into the war industry to support Ukraine. That's what it was all from the beginning. It was never about. I said from the very beginning, Ukraine has zero chance of beating Russia in a head-to-head matchup. It can't be done. It doesn't matter how much weaponry is sent to Ukraine. It can't be done. It was never about supporting Ukraine until they won the war. It was keeping money-making operations going nonstop. And many of the people who invest in AIPAC are the same people equally invested, or more so, in the war industry corporations. AIPAC does what? AIPAC convinces our politicians to first of all, keep sending your military budget or a portion of military budgeting to Israel. Why does Israel keep mowing the grass every 2 to 3 years in Gaza, killing thousands of people over and over and over and over and over again? There's money to be made. I mean, it serves multiple purposes. You get to, from the geopolitical standpoint, you get some territorial gains. The Zionists get their victories. But more so than that, there's money being made. A lot of it. Israel, why are they throwing so many weapons into Gaza? And then saying, oh, give us more, give us more. The same people who are funding AIPAC, getting AIPAC to buy our politicians and making our politicians keep the war funding going to Israel. Guess what? Those same billionaires are the ones making the money off the wars in Israel. AIPAC is a vehicle for rich people to make money off of war at the expense not only of the Palestinian civilian population, they're the ones dying, but who do you think is paying for this? Me, you. And the American people just keep going along with it. Now, I know it's hard to overthrow, to dismantle AIPAC or reduce the influence, but Here's the thing. Who do you think is funding this? I've seen, when I was a kid growing up, I was heavily involved in politics even as a kid because my my grandmother was an elected politician, a judge. I've always been involved in politics my whole life, and I always enjoyed it. The process. I knew politicians are dirty, but it has gotten dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. But what I saw change was the common citizens, the voters, stopped participating in the political process, saying, we have no say, they're all corrupt, blah, 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 I'm not going to participate. We have got the lowest level of voter participation. And I don't mean just every 4 years in a presidential election. I mean throughout the year. Not just voting, but contacting members of Congress. We are at the lowest level in the history of United States. We don't reach out and try and hold our politicians accountable. It's not because there isn't potential to impact them. There is. But it's because we have been brainwashed as a society that it's fruitless, that it's pointless to do it. It's going to happen anyway. It won't happen anyway. We can make a difference, damn it. Stop being lazy. Stop making the excuses. That doesn't mean, like, for example, I'm not going to vote for Trump. I'm not going to vote for Biden. I'm not going to vote for either of those idiots. I never vote for the lesser of two evils, but I still participate in the political process. I do my best in the other races that I can if I see that I can make a difference, but I also contact my representatives. I hold them accountable to the extent that I can. But when you have such a small percentage of us doing this, engaging in civic responsibility, no wonder we have no control over these politicians. No wonder the corporations, the big oil, big tech, big pharma, the Israeli lobby, the war industry, no wonder they are the ones. We don't even try. And it's been a great, big, gigantic psyop against my generation and the rising generations into believing we can't do anything anyway, so stop even trying. Don't even try. Don't vote. Don't participate. Don't contact your legislators. You're right. We have an uphill battle because it's gotten so damn low, so bad. It's going to be a real struggle. It's always, from the beginning, been a struggle to hold politicians accountable. But right now, I feel like we are morally bankrupt as citizens by not even trying. We need to do our best. I'm proud of the people out there doing sit-ins over what Israel is doing. And you know what? The majority of the people who are engaging in the real civil disobedience are Jews, American Jews, occupying legislators' offices, forcing the police to come and arrest them, take them off. We have to fight back. And tweeting about it is not enough. That's an important component, engaging people. But what really matters is to address this where the power is. Our politicians need to know that if they take money from AIPAC, we will consider them enemies of the American people and the American people's interests. And we will not vote for them. And beyond that, we will campaign against them. We will primary challenge them. We will support some idiot in a big bird costume who doesn't know jack crap. I will vote for D's nuts before I vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump. I will vote for anyone as a protest vote against these people who are beholden to Israel or to any of these major evil interests. It's time that the American people stop being wusses and stop moaning about how we can't do anything and start doing something. I spilled my drink. Do something. Stop talking and start doing. I have seen enough of the death and misery of the Palestinian people that I am beyond disgusted with what my government is doing with my tax money. It horrifies me. It infuriates me. Join me, as I have joined the many others out there who are doing something. Do more. Yeah, I'm reading the comments. People like I knocked my drink over. It's still there. It just spilled. Join me out there. I'm going to take a second and log into my other accounts. I do want to wrap it up here. I swear. Bear with me here. I got to get my codes for logging in. I should have done this before I started, but it probably would have locked it up anyway. Timed out. Okay. Okay. Nothing on PayPal. Let's see here. People have really stopped using PayPal compared to in the past. The Buy Me a Coffee has been really popular compared to PayPal as far as, like, for me, with receiving donations. I don't know why. And I had never used it up until like a month and a half ago. All right. And almost done. Sorry, I know I'm keeping you just sitting there. All right. Well, no donations through PayPal, no donations through Patreon, no donations through Buy Me a Coffee. Okay. I won't complain. But anyway, I am going to be publishing more on Substack. So make sure you sign up for that if you didn't hear my message about that earlier. And let's see here. Substack, yeah, blackstoneintel.com. No, blackstoneintel.substack.com. And Patreon, I'm going to be moving a lot more of my material. I'll still do videos like this, but a lot of my other content I'm going to be putting into Substack and Patreon moving forward. Something else that I'm going to be putting out, and I'll show you this. I've got all the components for some Palestine support packs, pins, bracelets, some other stuff that I'm going to package together along with one or two of my reports, and put that out there if anyone wants to get some stuff where you can show your support for Palestine. But anyway, all right, I can take one or two quick questions, and then I'm going to wrap it up. It's about 11 o'clock here, East Coast time. Let's see here. Let me see if I see any questions. Marvin asked, Jake, have you ever watched Gerald Celente? Not for years now. Back in 2014, 15, I used to watch him frequently. kind of in my earlier years on here, and over time, I found that a lot of what he was saying, he used to publish the something trends report. But I just found that so much of what he said was not very well sourced, and many of his predictions were just dead wrong. And so I think that he's got some good ideas, but I actually don't watch many people on YouTube anywhere anymore. Trends Journal, yeah, yeah. I used to like his stuff, and just over time, I got to where I didn't really have a whole lot of time. So I don't know. Maybe his accuracy has come up since back then. But uh, because I follow trends in general, and I've got my own predictions on various trends. Mostly, I was watching his trends predictions on the economy. That because that was a big interest of mine back around 14, 15, and he was just wrong all the time. But then again, so were a lot of people, because no one really anticipated how rascally the Federal Reserve. We always knew the Fed was, crooked and corrupt, but uh, the actions they took to perpetuate this bubble, I mean, we thought it was going to pop in 2014. So anyway, maybe outside of that, um, yeah. Ethanite says I'll be adding these nuts as my next write-in candidate. I wrote in 2020. I wrote in Godzilla for president on my ballot, and actually did some campaigning, made some campaign ads and stuff. And I had quite a few people, my audience members, say that they wrote in they wrote in Godzilla for president as a protest vote. Someone says, "Oh, all right, someone." Uh, did donate $5. Thank you so much. I want to say to, because it's anonymous, I can see the name here, and I'll just say it was a Hotmail email address. I don't want to identify you publicly, um, unless you want to identify yourself. But thank you very much. I appreciate it. Very, very, very much appreciated. And yeah, Dennis Kucinich. Dennis Kucinich was on. His domestic politics were way off from where mine were and are. But when it came to foreign policy, he and Ron Paul were always very closely linked in their foreign policy views. And they were able to reach across the aisle, even though they were different parties, and because they had similar views on foreign policy. RAO asks, did you read about Islam? If yes, what do you think about it as a religion? I have. All right. So after 9/11, I had never studied Islam before 9/11. After 9/11, because there was so much focus on the whether or not Al Qaeda was motivated by religious reasons or not, I was interested. So I found I think it was on TV, there was an ad commercial where you could order a free Quran. And so I did, and I read it. I don't have that original copy, but I actually have on my bookshelf over here. I'm not going to hop up and go grab them, but I've got 2 or 3 gorgeous copies of the Quran that viewers have sent me. And I occasionally go to it and skim through when I want to look up something. I don't it's not like I read it daily or anything, but I've read the Quran. I see Islam myself in much the same way I see Christianity in general, in that it can be used for good or for evil, depending on the viewpoint, the perspective of the person using it. There have been a lot of bad things done by Christians in the world. There have been a lot of bad things done by Muslims in the world. But there have been just as many, far more good things that have been done by Christians and by Muslims in the world. I think that religion in general has some influence over a person's character for sure. And my wife and I were talking about this recently. But I think that religion and religious texts are it's almost like a Rorschach test. Different people will see different things. People who are of a certain mindset are going to do bad things. If they don't have religion as an excuse, they're going to find some other reason. There are plenty, in fact, the majority of the biggest atrocities committed in the last couple hundred years have not been by religionists. It's been by atheists. Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, these people were not Muslims or Christians or Jews, or it wasn't about religion. So I think that religion can be used as a tool for good. I think that we can develop ourselves with it, but I think it depends on the person's moral character. The same person who is going to do decent things to their fellow man, just general acts of kindness. They're the same kind of person who could take a religious text and improve their lives and improve their community through their as a form of motivation. But if you're someone of a poor moral character already, religion, you can take a religious text, skip past the good parts, like love thy neighbor, and just go straight to the bad parts of, oh, you like in the Old Testament, you worked on the Sabbath, you picked up sticks, you gathered sticks for a fire, so we're going to take you out and stone you to death. And I think it's the same thing with Islam. There's a lot of beauty in the history of Islam. There's a lot of terror in the history of Islam, just like with Judaism, just like with Christianity. I look at all the good. I have not had a single, not one bad experience with a Muslim in my life. Not one. And I have interacted with hundreds of Muslims during my life. Are they good because of their religion? I don't know. Maybe they would be just as good without religion. Same with Christianity. I've known so many good Christians. I've known plenty of bad Christians. I do know far more Christians than I know Muslims. There's a lot of awful stuff in Christianity these days in the name of religion. And there's certainly, I mean, you can see with Judaism, there's a lot that they even have a religious Zionist party in Israel that is the most far right party of any of the ones they have in the Knesset. And some of the radical Netanyahu's radical ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir, religious nutcase, uses religion as justification to commit atrocities. So anyway, I've got not only books on not only religious texts from Islam, but I've also got books about the contributions of Islamic society. And I'll tell you what, during the Dark Ages, if it wasn't for Muslims, we would have a very different state of the world right now, because they preserved a lot when Western Christian Europe was languishing in the Dark Ages. They were doing a lot to preserve ancient knowledge, texts, developing sciences, mathematics. Then you've got the bad parts, convert or we'll cut off your heads. There are those examples. There are the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia that throw gay people off buildings, that take people who who manage to get on the social media and tweet the wrong thing, get out and taken and get lashed out in public. They still do public beheadings for petty offenses there. But so you've got good and you've got evil. It's the same among all people, whether you have religion or don't have religion. I think it really comes down to the heart of the individual. But anyway, I get something out of it. I get something out of. I'll tell you what one of my favorite religious texts is. I don't have the. Sorry, but I don't have any real love of the Talmud. I don't. I don't own the copy because it's like 60,000 pages, something like that. I've got it digitally, digital copy. But in all the reading I've done, I'm not real fond of what I've read. I love reading the Old Testament, but I don't get a whole lot of spiritual value out of it. I do like the teachings of Jesus. I'm not as crazy about certain interpretations by Paul, but still in general. I like the earlier parts of the Quran much more than the later parts of the Quran. But a text that I really enjoy, I've also read a lot of Buddhist teachings. Having lived in Thailand, I was exposed to it, and I've got one book that I picked up actually in California. It was a free book full of Buddhist teachings I got. But one of my favorites is the Bhagavad Gita. Weird. I don't take it literal. The stories are pretty wild, but I get a lot out of that. Very esoteric kind of interpretation of things. I get stuff out of that. But anyway, Cali Girl says she made a donation through PayPal. Thank you, Cali Girl. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. People are asking about Ryan Dawson and different people like that, different YouTubers or people in social media. Here's in general, like I said, I don't watch a whole lot of content from other YouTubers. It's not that I'm too good for it. It's just that I don't have time. But in the past, a lot of the people that I've seen, I don't like I like things that are more, I don't want to say dry, but things that are less sensational. A lot of people they get popular because they say some pretty outrageous things, and they say things that are very provocative and sometimes nasty, and I don't like that kind of material. I like just straightforward in my style. I like information. I like information. I like sources. I like philosophy. I'm not so much into focusing on personalities or any claims that end up taking a very complex issue and boiling it down into something that we're supposed to believe is just so simple. I won't name names, but I saw somebody who's got a couple 100,000 followers on Twitter just bashing Jews and making the point, I don't care about, I'm not afraid to talk about the Jews. There's very few good Jews. 99% of them are bad and all this, and making fun of people that make distinctions between the far right Zionists and acknowledging that you've got a lot of Jews that do a lot of good, especially in standing up for Palestine. This person, no, lots of followers. And I understand how that's appealing to the masses. That's why Donald Trump is so appealing. You don't go to Donald Trump for intelligent policy debate or discussion. You go for the carnival show. Same with Biden. Biden, maybe possibly in his younger years, but I don't remember a time. I remember Biden from the 80s. I've never known Biden to be an intelligent person. He tells folksy stories. Almost all of them are lies. He makes it up on the fly. But same thing. How does someone like Biden? I don't get it. It's just not my style. I like people who can discuss the issues in nuanced ways with details and have an informed opinion. So those are the kinds of people that generally you'll see me. So people ask too about this newer person, Shiva, Dr. Shiva, and I had never heard of Dr. Shiva until like a month ago or something. And so some of the stuff I look at is from him. I think, okay, this it sounds reasonable. Some of it I can tell is fluff, but some of it's reasonable. And then I'll come across something where it's just nonstop profanity and just very foul stuff. I'm like, come on, dude. I know this gets you the clicks, but yeah. So Risha is talking about, for example, Norman Finkelstein. Finkelstein is, he's aggressive, but he's also brimming with valid information. He's a good source of information. You may not agree with him on some stuff. There's some stuff I disagree with him on. I disagree with him on at least his current viewpoint of the BDS movement. But still, he's the kind of person I would love to talk to. I disagree a lot with Noam Chomsky, but I would love to have a conversation with Chomsky, because in our back and forth, in our disagreement and our exploration of an issue, I would learn something. Either I would learn from him because he says something I didn't know, or he will present a perspective that maybe I haven't considered, and possibly I'll come away still completely disagreeing with him, but it will have compelled me to think about my own beliefs from a different viewpoint. And that means I may moderate what I think, I may modify it, or I may just come up, it may just reinforce that, no, I got this one right. I'm solid on this. I'm not getting anything out of it. But at least I want the opportunity for that kind of intellectual back and forth. Kaboom says, the Austin Institute, Dr. Roy Casagranda. I'll have to check that out. Miko Peled. Katie Cat, I think that I have seen, and I may be saying the name wrong. I think I have seen, but I will, let me print screen, and I'm going to check that out. A couple of these names that you guys are suggesting. I do have a preference for people who know history, because I majored in history. I just love history. Freedom Fox asks, Jake, what parts of Chomsky do you most disagree with? I think that Chomsky, I'm not with him on his assessment of the issue of climate change, and he'll often say that's in the top or top two most urgent, most important issues, man-made climate change. I don't doubt at all that climate change is real, and that it is a looming problem, that it's gonna cause some major changes. I am not convinced that it's the result of fossil fuels. I think that fossil fuels contribute considerably to global pollution, and that's reason alone to deal, to move toward newer technologies. But also the issue with fossil fuels for me is just it's a source of perpetual warfare. Wars for oil. I would love to see us get off fossil fuels. But anyway, so that's just, for example, one thing with Chomsky that, and he's far more progressive in his political views. His I don't go anywhere near the lengths of criticism of capitalism that he does. I see the problems with the perversion of capitalism as we have it. And I have my views on capitalism have evolved some from when I was younger and was, diehard total free market capitalism. And if corporations grow up and become monstrosities, so be it. That's for the greater good. But now I see the power of destruction that unregulated mega corporations, multinationals have on the people, on society. You can't, when it gets to the point that a corporation gets the ear of my political representative because they can donate more money than me, there's a problem. There needs to be reform. So anyway, that's just something. Mohican says he wrote a book as a son of a general. Let's see here. Katie Cat. I'll definitely check out Miko. I think I've watched something recently, but I don't remember if I don't know that I'm remembering the name right. Could have been someone else. Yeah, and Chomsky, I think was wrong on COVID. But I mean, I think he's in his 90s now. I don't expect him to be as sharp and analytical as he was decades ago. But anyway, Marvin says no more PAC money in government, no more dual nationals in our government. Maybe government will work for us. Yeah, I agree. I don't at the federal level. I don't think anyone should hold more than one citizenship. And our founders knew that for good reason. Now they didn't enshrine it in the original U.S. Constitution because so many of them they dealt with the reality of their day, but it doesn't work for ours. We've got hundreds of millions of American citizens. We don't need to dip into citizens of other countries to be our representatives. Come here, become an American citizen, give up any loyalties you have to any other country, then I'll consider having you represent me. Unless I have dual citizenship and you represent the multiple countries I'm a citizen of, I don't want you as my representative. My my view on COVID was always the same, and that is let the people decide for themselves. Don't use government to compel people to either get vaccinated or force people to make choices that they don't want to. It needs to be you can protect the vulnerable without having to violate people's rights. And that was always the problem. But COVID, like so many other issues, became politicized and it became right versus left. And nobody wants to listen to each other. No one wants to work out some compromise. And in the process, it tears things up. And we've got this next year is going to be total chaos in the US political system. You've got all of these trials of Trump. And as verdicts come out, that's going to really cause a lot of trouble. You've got the House voting to begin the impeachment inquiry. It's not actual impeachment hearings or anything, but the House voted today to look into more formally whether or not Biden has a history of corruption partly due to Hunter Biden's time in Ukraine and China and these things. I support an inquiry. I don't support going forward with impeachment proceedings when you don't have evidence. You have to gain the evidence first to say there's enough here to act on it. So go for it. Doesn't hurt anything for the Republicans to investigate. The Democrats certainly didn't mind doing all of their investigations of Trump all the time. And as it turned out, they didn't have enough on Trump to impeach him for collusion with Russia to steal the 2016 election. So it'll be the same with the Republicans. They can investigate it all they want. There's not going to be the votes there to impeach Biden if there's scant evidence of a crime. It doesn't work that way. But anyway, regardless, if they keep moving forward, if they take it from, okay, we think there's enough evidence, boy, are we in for a wild year. I've always said, impeach them all. Anybody who makes it into the presidency, just about anyone, is very likely corrupt, at least in the modern age. Very likely corrupt. And we don't use impeachment enough. Not just on presidents. You can impeach any government official. Hey, Mr. Darwish, Jake, do you have do you think any country should have the right of power like China, Russia, and the United States? Talking about the UN Security Council, you've got 4 member states who have the ability to veto. No, I think that the Security Council resolutions are mostly toothless statements anyway. So if you have a majority, I think that maybe you should have a compromise would be maybe requiring a supermajority. Maybe you could have, instead of the United States. So for example, you've got, 16 members, nations on the United Nations Security Council. And they just, the Secretary General just used a rule to compel a vote in the Security Council on a resolution that would formally call for a ceasefire. Security Council resolutions are not binding. But anyway, it's a statement. Of the 16, 14 nations voted in favor of the ceasefire resolution. The UK abstained, but one of the 4 states that has the veto power, the United States, vetoed the resolution. And the USA does that all the time. All the time. I don't think that for the purposes of the United Nations, I don't think that one nation should be able to just blanket veto when they're the lone voice in opposition, especially when a resolution is just that. It's just a statement. It's not like mobilizing action or anything. So perhaps instead, what you could have is like in the U.S. Congress, sometimes you have just a straight up majority vote. If you have a majority, just even by one, then a law passes. But there are certain things where you can require a supermajority, where you have to have 2/3 of the members vote. So maybe you could say, instead of having veto power, United States, Russia, China, maybe what they could do is invoke this supermajority requirement, and then it would take 2/3 of the member states, and that would be a little more of a democratic balance. It would still give the big nations a little more power, I guess, since we have much larger populations. Who wants Micronesia deciding, having equal power with the United States? And they're not one of the 16, but just, that was the big argument when they were setting up the Constitution is, well, do you give all the states the same number of representatives? Well, how is that? If you're a big state, how is that fair to you? But then again, so they came up with this bicameral legislature where you've got every single state, no matter how large or how small, has 2 senators. But you also have every state where the number of representatives in the House are apportioned based on that state's population. So it was kind of a compromise. So I'm saying something like that for the UN Security Council. I don't know. I've never thought about it. That's just off the top of my head an idea. Oh, good. And you agree with, so that's good. Oh, hello from Iran. Hello to you. Good to talk with you. There have been a lot of messages that have skimmed by, and I apologize if I have missed anything big here. So let me go ahead and wind it down and say thank you to you all. I saw the name Iron Man Metal in there. Oh, yeah. Hey, Bill. Good to see you, Bill. You know what? Well, all right. I'll talk to Bill sometime. All right. Do I have any thoughts of visiting Iran in the near future? Definitely not in the near future because I don't have enough money for a trip to Iran. But otherwise, I wouldn't mind visiting Iran. There's some very, very beautiful parts of the country I wouldn't mind visiting, but I don't have any immediate plans. Oh, I love some of the architecture in Tehran is gorgeous. But anyway, oh, thank you. Miss Medor says, just sent you PayPal. I appreciate you. Thank you very much. You guys are good to me. Well, I am going to, yeah, political foolishness says, I've given up on the UN for anything. I've never held any strong support for the United Nations ever. In fact, I helped my son, one of my sons, when he was in high school, he wanted to enter this contest where you give a speech and the winner for the high school gets a paid trip to New York City to visit the UN and also sightsee. And he had never been to New York City. So I was like, I've got some thoughts on the United Nations. I said, why don't you let me help you with that? And we came up with a damning critique of the ineffectiveness of the United Nations. And he gave that as a speech, and doggone it, he won, which surprised me. And so my son got a trip. He went with his teacher, but they got to the United Nations building. They took him and some other people. There were about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 kids from various schools. Took them, gave them a tour, took them into, the main chamber there where the votes happen and everything. But also, they each delivered their speeches to a representative there at the United Nations. He told me, he said after he gave his speech and looked over at the representative from the United Nations, said the guy was sitting there with his eyes wide and his mouth open, stunned that anyone would come to the United Nations and basically rip the United Nations into shreds to their faces. And he lectured my son. He said, you don't have the right disposition or understanding and blah, 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 blah. And but my son said that after it was over, a man that was in there, I don't know, it was a teacher from another school or something with one of the other students. But anyway, some guy came up and said, I agree with you completely. That's the kind of stuff they need to be told. But I've got a very nice picture of my son in the, in there in the United Nations room, with the green walls and everything. And I've been in there too. It's been years, but I've gone through the United Nations. But anyway, uh, but here's what the UN does do well. I do believe that there is value in having a place where the international community can get together in a safe environment and discuss their issues. I don't believe that the United Nations should have any binding power on any other country. I certainly would never agree to US sovereignty being uh, subjected to the power of the United Nations. Never. My government, good or evil, is mine to deal with. It's not the job of representatives from other countries to come in and decide my future in my country or what my government's going to do. But I do think it's good to have a forum where people can discuss their issues. I think that the main value of the United Nations is having a place where the international community can pool support or resources or discuss issues to support those in need. I object to foreign aid. I don't think that any tax dollars should be redistributed to other countries, but I do think that other countries the fact is that that's what countries do. So as long as it's happening, I think that it facilitates, for example, uh, almost 80%, I think it is, of the people in Gaza are not even truly Gazans. They're not from Gaza. They're refugees that were driven out by the Israelis in 1948 and again in 1967, some in 1973, who were driven into Gaza out of their own homes outside of Gaza, and so they're refugees there. There are, I think it's 60 throughout the Palestinian territories, and I think also just among the Palestinian refugees, I think there are 60 refugee camps throughout Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, so forth. And in those refugee camps, especially in Gaza, those people are alive because the United Nations is in there providing the aid. And it's the pool of resources brought together. And now there is a lot that other organizations do. I'm not saying the UN's the only one, but these refugee camps are basically everything in and out of the refugee camps goes through UNRWA or UNICEF. And so humanitarian assistance is something that they can do. Having a body to call out the crimes of Israel, for example, or the crimes in any other country, large scale crimes like genocide or ethnic cleansing. The problem is, like Mr. Darwish brought up earlier, is that it doesn't work. It's broken. The United Nations does not do what it's supposed to do. And when you have one rogue nation that can veto it, the efforts, then it doesn't do much good. So there needs to be major reforms in the United Nations. I don't support U.S. tax dollars going to fund the United Nations. I've got a blue book from the John Birch Society, which was staunchly opposed, back in the 50s and 60s, staunchly opposed to the United Nations creation and everything. And the blue book goes through all the reasons why, the motto was, get the U.S. out of the UN and get the UN out of the U.S. And back then, I think there was a whole lot more fear that the United Nations was going to serve as this what we all kind of from the Christian perspective saw as one day there was going to be the rise of a global government that was going to act as a monstrosity throughout the world and would serve as the source of the one world government. And certainly that was the idea that Rockefeller had when he funded the building of the United Nations. But it hasn't turned out that way. I think that China and some of the other nations out there are just you've got a competition to this Western dominance. That was the direction it was moving, toward global government. But that's been curtailed. We're getting closer and closer, where we're virtually in a system now where you no longer have a unipolar world where the USA is the dominant power. We're basically now the USA and China are the two major world powers, with growing influence from India and, of course, strong influence from Russia. But I don't see the United Nations as the kind of global one world government threat that I did years ago, and that's largely because of the change of the escalating power of China as a foil to the Western dominance. Cali Girl says there should be no NATO or World Health Organization. I agree with that completely. That's one where I say obliterate it instantly. NATO serves no good moral purpose whatsoever. None. I absolutely support the USA being the United States makes up over 70% of NATO. Now there's a whole lot more member states, but it's crazy because 70% of the NATO fighting forces are American troops. 15% are British troops. The remaining 5 or so percent, that's what the rest of the world makes up. NATO or the other member states. NATO is basically just a cover for the US military to operate in ways that the American people would normally not approve of. If it's NATO, okay, what's NATO? People don't realize it's basically just the US military and some of the Brits over there warmongering throughout Europe. But the thing is, we form these military pacts where if you attack one NATO state, you attack all of us, which triggers Article 5, where we have to respond. You get, Moldova or some place over there gets attacked, and suddenly the USA is obligated through NATO pacts to get involved. Heaven forbid Ukraine should ever become a NATO state. Lawyer for the People says, Jake, do you have a cold? Well, first of all, I am cold in general. I'm freezing here, and I do have congestion. So yes, in fact, I've been using some nasal spray here. It's not a straight up cold, but I am congested. Political Foolishness says, I've become negative on Switzerland because they are harboring many of the globalist organizations like the WHO, WEF, and about 100 more. Many of their members don't pay taxes and have diplomatic immunity. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't support any of these other globalist organizations. I don't even support the United Nations. We would continue to have dialogue even if we didn't have the United Nations. As long as United Nations does not have teeth, as long as it's a place where people can go to debate issues, discuss grievances, but there's no power behind the United Nations to compel anyone to do anything, okay. NATO is a different story. The World Health Organization has way too much power and influence. Yeah, you don't have to always invoke Article 5. It just depends on what the agenda of the United States is at the time, what we want. Jake, do you believe America is Babylon the Great spoken of in the book of Revelation? I used to. And I still would if I had the same kind of interpretation of the book of Revelation that I used to. I see now more after reading a handful of books on the subject, I see the book of Revelation as having far more application to its time, to the um, Roman Empire than I do this futuristic time period. But in that way of looking at it, uh, obviously the United States is the the real force for evil in the world. But I don't think that we're going to be around as that power for a very long time. The Roman Empire was around forever. We're not going to last like that. We're not going to make it. We're already in decline as a world power, and it's going to seem like we're on top, and then something's going to click. We're going to have a major economic collapse because world powers have decided they're no longer going to support the US dollar. There's so many things that could happen. So I think that the USA's time as this world power, I think before I am gone from this earth, I just turned 50 a month ago. I think if I live to be 80, I think that it's unlikely the United States will be the I think will be clinging on as a first world power. I could be wrong, but I think we're going to be a very mellowed out first world power, kind of like we were just after World War II. The British Empire was basically over at that point. Soviets were a growing power, and we emerged as a new power, but we weren't the kind of global empire that we are today. That's what I think we're going to be 3 or 4 decades from now. That's just my guess. I don't know, but that's my sense of things. I don't think we can't sustain this fake economy we have. We are propped up because of the petrodollar and because of the world's faith in the credit of the United States. They believe that we can pay our debts, and so they buy our treasury bonds. Basically, what we do is we spend. Congress will spend. Hey, another 105 billion for Ukraine and Israel. Got it. Now we're currently in a 1.7 trillion dollar deficit. So where's the money going to come from? We can't even pay the interest on our national debt at this point. So where does the money come from? Well, the Fed is going to print it. Not literally print paper, but they're going to create it. They create it through issuing debt. Foreign governments see our debt, as a way to invest. They buy our treasury bonds. A treasury bond is basically taking US debt and packaging it. We get to spend the money, we get to use it, but the money comes from other governments buying our debt, and then after a certain period of time, the US government pays out interest on those treasury bonds to the country that bought it. If countries stop buying our debt, what we're doing now, this fake money system that's all just, it's not backed by gold, it's not backed by anything real, that will come to an end. It can't be supported. Nixon got us off the gold standard because it was becoming clear to the world at that point that the USA didn't have the amount of gold that our debt was supposed to be supporting. So at this point, it's, can the USA pay back its debt? At a certain point, the debt is going to become so big, and all it's going to take is another like 2008 type crisis. They're going to see the USA can't pay its debts. And if the USA is likely to not pay the interest or repay these countries that are buying our debt, they're going to stop buying the debt. They're going to make effectively like margin calls, and we're going to be screwed. And it's going to happen quickly. Right now, the air is leaking out of the balloon slowly. It's not an outright pop, but the air is going out. But if we get into a major conflict with China, and China ends up going forward with its basket of global funds, if you've got the BRICS model, and the world turns to that, to a basket of currencies rather than the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, we're toast. We're screwed. And that's when there's going to be a return to massive out of control inflation, gas lines like crazy, like this 70s. We're going to not be able to buy all of this cheap crap from China that fills up Walmart and everything. People are not going to be able to go and buy stuff off the dollar menu at McDonald's because the prices are going to be high. I remember the 1970s. I remember a very different time period where you didn't buy a whole lot of stuff because we couldn't afford it. Manufacturers couldn't afford to make it. So there was a much smaller pool of goods. And that's going to happen to us. We will live to see that. I will. Yeah. Evan points out there's no dollar menu even now. Yeah, just a handful of years ago we had the dollar menu. You can't even go into a dollar store anymore and buy things for $1. Now everything is jacked up. So as presidents come and go, we have this. It has virtually nothing to do with the president who's in office. Whether it's Trump, it's not like Trump got in there and did things that brought things. He just happened to be in office at that time. Biden happens to be in office at this time. It's the Federal Reserve. They control inflation, or at least they claim to control inflation. Up and down, up and down. They're the ones that are really the major threat to us, because they just keep issuing all of this debt, funding wars, funding bailouts. Let the major corporations, the major banks fail. Yeah, it's going to hurt. It's going to be tough. A lot of Americans are going to be hurt as a result. But better to take our lumps now than let the bubble grow even bigger. And when that pops, it destroys everybody. 2008, there never should have been a bailout. Yes, the dominoes would have fallen. Yes, we would have been in a state of cataclysmic economic meltdown. But we would have survived. When this pops, it'll make the Great Depression look like a birthday party. Bippity boppity boo wants to know how many children I have. Why do you want to know how many children I have? I have 10 children. Abel Malcolm says it doesn't matter what type of government you have, but if that government is corrupt, it is doomed to failure. That's something else that has shifted in my mind over the years. Is I used to be staunchly against all forms of socialism, but as I still am for most types of socialism. But when I look at the types of some of the Scandinavian models, which are very different from from the traditional like Cuban communism or some of the socialist systems. The Scandinavian model I think is intriguing. It's at least it's not something that I think is superior to properly managed capitalist system, but I see how it can work. I see the benefits. I see, but that it the problem is the United States is so much bigger. That model would not work here with our population, and certainly not with the kind of spending spree that we're always on. We would have to have a much more fiscally responsible government, which we don't have. Anyway, that's just my thought. I, it was back during I think 2016 election. Um, Someone had sent me a Bernie Sanders book, and I don't like I don't like Bernie Sanders politics on just about anything except some of his foreign policy views. But I read it. I wanted to be open minded, and I read it, and it got me thinking about different models of socialism, and I found that I still held the same beliefs after studying it. Still had the same opposition to socialism that I always had until I came up against some of those Scandinavian models, and then I thought, okay, this could work for that society, that size, but it doesn't work with us. I think the United States needs a capitalist system, but to have true capitalism, you can't have. We're not a capitalist system, like Ron Paul used to say. We don't have capitalism. We have corporatism. Government is in bed with corporations, primarily big oil, big pharma, big tech, and the war industry. You can't have the government managing the economy like this and it be and it work. So anyway, lawyer for the people. I don't know how serious you are. Says I think that we as a country should worry about men being able to use the women's restroom. That is a far more important to talk about rather than these profitable wars. Absolutely. I know it's tongue in cheek. Oh, Mohican says, I hope your twins are doing well. They are doing great. They are beautiful and make me extraordinarily happy. Super cute. And I'm having fun getting ready for Christmas to surprise them with some fun stuff. Cali Girl says she campaigned for Bernie and he's a big fat liar. Yeah, he really has gone back on a lot of his principles, or at least principles that he claimed to have. I didn't agree with him on a lot of the economics for the United States, and I'm open to the discussion. I can have the discussion, but uh, on foreign policy, that's where I found my greatest agreement with Bernie Sanders. Whereas what the Democrats and Republicans were saying, I didn't agree with virtually anything because it's all the same. It's neoconism, it's expansion and empire. It really just comes down to a preference of where you expand the empire. Republican neocons want to expand in the Middle East. That's why you had Trump's heavy involvement in Israel and Saudi Arabia, Syria to take the oil, Iraq, and then, as expected, when Biden took over, he pulled back some from the Middle East and pushed more into Europe to expand empire there. So it's just they're all the same. They have the same neocon agenda. It's just about where do you want to where do you want to make your money? Yeah. What's with Bernie Sanders voting in favor of all of these, defense bills? It's crazy. Uh, Pork Bacon says, regardless from which party, people should ask the politicians they prefer to support where they got their large foreign donations. Most likely, that's their priority. Never been for the most of us. Yeah. Abel says, a few rich and corrupt billionaires always get their way, but the rest of us, the politicians, ignore. This is not a democracy. At best, it's a plutocracy. Yeah. I used to love my country. Then I learned what my country was doing, and I learned who controls my country. I was a big Reagan fan when I was a kid. Big fan of Reagan. I supported Reagan throughout the Iran Contra hearings. I've still got his final State of the Union address where I took my little tape player and like held it up to the TV and recorded it, because back then there was no digital anything. I recorded it and I would just sit there playing his State of the Union address over and over. I think I was 12 or 13, maybe 12. I was such an idiot, such a dork. But as I grew up and as I learned more, I was able to look back and see, okay, there's a whole lot going on here I didn't realize at the time. So I don't fault people today for not knowing things. I fault people when they are presented with the information to be able to consider the additional facts. If they then refuse to reform their ideas when faced with evidence that their position is either wrong or very incomplete, that's when I don't respect people. That's when I have a problem. Anyway, well, listen, I appreciate you guys. I thank you for hanging out with me, and I'm going to close it here and talk to you guys next time. Sign up on Substack, and if you have a dollar or two that you'd like to donate, you got the different options there. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much to the moderators for helping out. Love you guys. Appreciate you. And I will talk to you next time.